Out of the 25 countries with the highest rates of violence against women in the world, 14, more than half, are located in Latin America and the Caribbean. Femicide, defined as the gender-related violent deaths of women, takes the lives of at least 12 women in the region every day. In the face of this ongoing crisis, the feminist movement in Latin America has coordinated a wide range of offline and online actions to raise awareness about the issue. In recent years, for example, feminist activists in countries like Ecuador, Argentina, Mexico, and Uruguay have created digital maps of femicide to highlight the dimension and the seriousness of this phenomenon. This is Elena Suarez Val, an Uruguayan researcher and feminist activist. In 2015, Elena started registering cases of femicide in Uruguay in the form of an interactive Google map. Every time there is a new case, she places a marker with the name of the victim, the date, and a short description of what happened, linking it to a newspaper article. She then posts a screenshot of the marker to social media, where it is circulated by other activists. For Elena, these digital cartographies are part of an effective-oriented attempt to shift the atmosphere surrounding the crisis of femicide from indifference to action. Feminicide Uruguay and similar mapping initiatives in the region are a good example of how feminist activists have appropriated digital mapping tools for performative, participative, and political ends. For Jeremy Crampton, these uses of Google Maps or Cartography 2.0 are completely different from traditional geography. Easy to use and widely available mapping tools such as Google Maps enable anyone to create and share stories to the benefit of activists like Elena. If you think of it, this celebratory account of digital mapping for activism sounds a lot like the democratic promises and mobilizing potentials envisioned for social media. These ideas have been advanced by Manuel Castells, for example, with his notion of mass self-communication as horizontal networks of interactive communication in the internet, which in his view are immune to corporate or state control. The problem, however, is that these positions tend to fall in the techno-utopian. As Christian Fuchs explains, the optimism about the participatory and mobilizing character of social media neglects important aspects that shape and filter communication in the internet, such as private ownership, advertising, surveillance, the symmetry of power and visibility, and the exploitation of digital labor. According to Lee, for instance, Google Maps promotes online behaviors that are more conducive to a consumer society than to a public culture. Similarly, Leszczynski has argued that Google Maps appropriates the digital labor of its citizen cartographers, not to mention the permanent tracking of their movements. It is locked down as a product and can show advertisements anywhere its map API is used. More importantly, the ownership of mapping applications by Google represents an enclosure of the Geographic Information Commons, which compromises its future availability. In other words, Google could change its API or shut down without notice, destroying all the projects built upon it. It's totally unaccountable, and all of this has implications for the actions of feminist activists like Elena. But Elena is well aware of this. In fact, in her work, she has called to problematize not only the use of digital mapping as a tool, but also feminist activism in relation to platforms created and maintained by powerful multinationals. I met her to discuss these issues. During our conversation, we talked about the implications of using corporately owned platforms for activism and why we shouldn't overestimate the role of the digital in social movements.
By the end of 2014, I actually came back to Uruguay. I normally live in England, and I got involved in the feminist movement there, and we started doing these mobilizations on the streets every time there was a case of feminicide. These were very spontaneous protests. They were a mix of marches, performances, but also a register started to take place of the cases as we were coming out to these marches. So by the end of 2015, I put the spreadsheet that we had with all those cases onto Google Maps, and I've been doing that mapping ever since. As well as the current space of maps of femicide, there's a very long genealogy to this kind of forms of what Sylvia Walby calls measuring violence to end violence. So there's, since the beginning of the feminist movement, we've understood that naming an issue is the only way to be able to see it and to be able to tackle it. And then once you've got the name, measuring that in order to prove that it's a systemic issue, that it's not just individual cases. I think they've also galvanized the feminist movement in some ways, not just the mappings, but the mappings within that context I was telling you about of marches and protests. So all of these things, it's just kind of giving force to the movement to say, yes, we're this actually is happening, and this is one of many things that we can do.
I wanted to ask you, and this is something that you've said yourself, that it's important to problematize the digital tool that you use to visualize this data. So here I am talking about Google Maps in specific. Google Maps is it's owned by Google. It's locked down as a product. It's not, you would say, like open source mapping and all. It's also meant for commercial things. You go Google Maps to find businesses more often. So how would you put the two together, like doing activism on a corporate owned platform?
Yeah, well, this is a big problem because well, it's a big problem, but it's also a big opportunity, I think. Although I think so naively, and I think that's important. Like when I say it's an opportunity, I always kind of I always highlight in my head the word naive, because it's Lorde said this. The tools of the master will never dismantle the master's house. And I believe that. But at the same time, I think we can chip at the master's house, and that's almost as necessary as destroying it. I think putting this information on the maps is actually teaching Google something. We know that Google algorithms kind of scrabble around looking at everything we do. Google is learning from us. Well, I wonder what Google might learn from a bunch of women registering cases of femicide, linking to the news articles that are related to it, and teaching the algorithm that this is what femicide is. But this is naive. I don't think we're gonna change the algorithm, and I don't think they would kind of destroy the whole platform capitalism. But there are things that can be done. The other thing is Google Maps is what people have on their phones. Of course, there are people that use OpenStreetMap, and other applications are now starting to be more common. But by and large, Google Maps is what you have with you all the time. It's kind of like close to you. It's almost part of your body, and I'm interested in that as well. It's not just about having it on the phone. I think when we look at Google Maps, we're also familiar with it. When I see the interface of OpenStreetMap, for example, I'm like, there's a discomfort there that I wish I had more patience to overcome. But in a way, I also think it's important to remember that, because in terms of the affective potential of using Google Maps, I think it can generate a kind of more interesting interaction with your subjectivity. So there's a naive, being in Google might change Google, and then there's also the pragmatic, you want a tool of activism to have an impact and to be seen. And so that's where you go where the people are.
Yeah, what you just said it reminds me of the political economy of alternative media. And for instance, Christian Fuchs and Marisol Sandoval have argued that this is what activists have to struggle with. It is a dilemma between wanting visibility, but at the same time you are sort of compromising your autonomy maybe for having to use these platforms, but those are the ones that are visible. And opting, as you said, for open source code maps, for instance, would compromise your visibility in that sense. So what are activists, and maybe specifically feminist activists, thinking about this? Because you know, of course, that feminism also has to be anti-capitalist, yes, in essence. So how do you merge both?
Well, in Latin America in particular, we always say feminism has many surnames, because it's anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-patriarchal, anti-colonialist. It has all this kind of added value, feminism, and I really believe that. But at the same time, activism is a practice, and practices are pragmatic. We can't fight everything all the time. I mean, of course, I understand that it would be best if we all didn't use Google, if we all kind of turned off the internet, if we all stopped buying smartphones, but we're here in this world now, and I decide at certain points to work on different issues. Nonetheless, I can't completely ignore the fact that capitalism is also part of a kind of real bad interaction with patriarchy, and actually has really serious effects on the lives of women. It's complicated. Having said that, I do think it would be really great for these kind of initiatives to be available in different formats, and more than anything, in order that they're more available. As you said, Google can just switch off and bam, garnish my data. So definitely I'm interested in collaborations with other activists who are actually more kind of interested in open source and open data. In fact, I'm soon to start a collaboration with the people working on Wikidata to try and put the data from the map on Wikidata so that it'll be available in a completely different format to more people.
So Christian Fuchs, for instance, he says that we have to take in account that like your agency is constrained by this very like structural forces behind social media, you know, and here maybe you could make a connection with what you were saying, that you were putting all these data on the map, but also Google is sort of appropriating that labor. It is in a sense labor. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. In some ways, perhaps I have a kind of like older woman pragmatic view on that, which is that my free labor has been and will be appropriated not only by Google, but by the system, so long as the system prevails. So, I was mentioning Jodie Dean of Cameron. That's the thing, like how do you escape capture? Can you escape capture? I often think about it, like when I'm more down on the map, maybe less naive, I'm kind of thinking, I'm just kind of like putting more information out there. This is all out there anyway. So yeah, that's the other thing, are these kind of mappings and these kind of communication artifacts just adding to the circuits of communicative capitalism, as she calls them, Sometimes I think yes, but I think then I bring myself back by thinking that it's like you gotta be pragmatic. It's like we're not gonna end patriarchy tomorrow. We're not gonna end capitalism tomorrow. And while we work on that, there's other things that we need to do, and we want a perfect world, but we're not perfect. And we do what we can, and so long as you try and make sure that you're not doing more harm.
And I also like how you connect these online actions, maybe what you do with the map and what you do on social media, but also with grounded action, direct action. Do you think it's important that what you do online always has to manifest and work side by side with actual demonstrations on the street?
I think it has to work side by side with everything. It's not delinked or isolated from the genealogy that I was talking about before. I wouldn't put it in opposition, like either or, never. I think there's value in doing online stuff as well as IRL stuff. But I do think, and this probably puts me in the older generation of, again, that just doing online stuff is not enough, I think it's necessary, because also that's where a lot of people are, but it's just not, because if we're thinking about the capture of capitalism and everything, like staying online with this illusion of community that we have there, it's like, it's dangerous, I think the online can really facilitate community, but there's nothing like meeting face to face. And with activism, it's the same,
Yeah, and I think that really like puts you apart from these people that have been widely criticized, and in particular they're scholars, but the techno-utopians, that thing that is just that's a protest emerges on social media, stays on social media, is possibilitated by social media, which is not true, like as you said, it has to has a physical manifestation, otherwise
I do think there's something there that we shouldn't discount it. We shouldn't discount the virtual, but we shouldn't reify it.
Elena is no internet centrist. She knows that digital media alone will not bring about social change, contrary to the positions advanced by Castells. As stressed by Fuchs and Sandoval, Elena, as well as other activists using corporately owned platforms, face a dangerous contradiction between the struggle for better communication and visibility and the risk of corporate and state control of activist communications. To avoid the capture of communicative capitalism, Elena is careful to locate her practice within a long genealogy of feminist actions where face-to-face encounters are paramount. As she said, quoting Lorde, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." In other words, as long as the internet is constrained by capitalist power, we shouldn't overestimate its role in social movements. Nevertheless, while Elena knows that feminist interrogation of the capitalist logic that drives the internet is needed, and that less visible open source tools are available, her choice has been pragmatic: to disobediently appropriate Google Maps to address the pressing need of actions to fight gender violence in Latin America.